Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so hopefully, I mean, you can always text me or email me or reach out to me if you have questions, but hopefully this will be a little bit easier, especially because I have work during the day and then I have other sessions throughout the day. So if I don't get back to you, and like I know me, like if I'm stuck on something, I want to know the answer right away. So hopefully you can rewatch it, and that way you'll have maybe some answer or some inclination of what to do.
Can you write down your number again in the chat, because I hadn't created a Zoom account, so it didn't save whenever you provided it to me.
I didn't know it saved chats.
Oh yeah, there it goes.
And we're gonna do this.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna take it really slow today. So take your time when I ask you questions, mule it over. If you do not know something, just straight up tell me you don't know, or you're completely confused at what I'm asking. I'm more so concerned about the setup than I am about the questions. So if it takes us the full hour to set it up, that's fine. We can deal with questions later. The questions are going to come fairly more easy once we get your setup correct, but that's what I'm concerned with. So give it time. Okay. Okay. So this is 64 game 1. So if you want to redo it in the future, which I usually recommend to like redo them on your own to kind of test yourself, you can. But this is 64 game 1. So we have an administrator must assign parking spaces to 6 new employees. We have R, S, T, V, X, and Y. Each of the 6 employees must be assigned one of the following parking spaces. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. No 2 employees can be assigned the same parking space. And then we have our rules down there. So as a bare bones setup, just kind of something that before we even look at the rules, what are you kind of inclined to do first? What is your first instinct to do with this scenario that it's giving you?
I would put the numbers down, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Perfect. This is what a very basic and very typical ordering game is going to look like. So this is the kind of setup that you can use in pretty much any ordering game. Some people don't use the numbers. Some people put the numbers at the bottom and go bottom up. I find it easy to go top down. Doesn't really matter because it's the same thing. So just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, cool. Yeah, there's not really much else to do. I would probably say the only thing I would also point out is we have 6 employees and we have 6 spots. So that's kind of important to see like how many spots you have and how many variables you have, because if you don't have a matching number, it either means you're going to have a blank spot or you're going to have repeated variables, which is not going to happen for like some of the more difficult games. For the more basic ordering games, they're always typically going to match up, or it's going to be very blunt and tell you 4 is not a space that you can use. Oh my gosh. This gnat has been flying around for like 4 days and I've been trying to get it. Oh my god, you're so annoying. Okay. I'm gonna get him. But so yeah, so we're going to use all of our variables, all of our spaces. We're not having any duplicates. We're not having any empty spaces. So it's kind of a good thing to notate when you're going into that. Any questions on like bare bones setup?
So for ordering, whenever you have like the variables and then the numbers, it'll always be like this, right? Like I'm gonna put the like Robertson and all of those as like letters, and then all the numbers all the time like that. Like this is gonna be the setup for ordering, right?
It doesn't have to be. It's my preference when I do it. Okay. So I always write my variables up at top, because when I go through them and if I know that, let's say I figure out R is in 5, I can cross out my variables, and that way it's kind of easy to know like, oh, I've placed everything except X and Y and Z. It's kind of an easy thing to see. You don't have to write the variables at the top. Some people don't. I do because it's easy to cross them off. And then your numbers can go any way if you really wanted to, which I probably wouldn't recommend. You could even do them up and down if you wanted to. It's a little different, but it's the same thing. We're basically ordering them from 1 to 6. So if I put R in 2, it means the same thing no matter how you format it, if that makes sense.
So it'll always like pop at me, right? Like what I'm gonna do. Like I don't have to go like on a scavenger hunt and see what variables like they'll be
Your
there.
variables will pop out at you.
Okay.
So for
Okay.
example, the next game, your variables are,
See, like Venezuela, Yemen. Okay, yeah, gotcha.
yeah. And then the next game, your variables are, this is
Ronaldo,
a little different because you have a
okay.
hybrid, but you can see clearly what your groups are or what your variables are. This is when your variables are clearly this. You should never really have to like search out what variables you're using.
Okay.
And for ordering games, it'll usually say something like, usually it's not this specific, usually it's something like the 6 variables will be ordered from highest to lowest, and you know that you have 6 variables, that means you have 6 spots. Or they're going to come, they're running a race, so they're placing as they cross the finish line, and you have 5 variables. You're going to have 5 places because you're kind of ordering those variables. It's not always as,
Mm-hmm.
did I really just throw my pen? It's not as, most of them are not as obvious as you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's usually
Okay.
1 to 6, 2 to 5, something like that. So, any other questions on like the setup?
No.
Okay, so let's go into the rules. This is where it gets fun. So our first rule says Y must be assigned to a higher number parking space than T. What is your first kind of instinct with that one?
Mm. So Y must be first in T? Is that Y must be assigned a higher number?
This one's a
I
little
guess
weird because it doesn't specify which one is the higher number. I would probably assume that 6 is going to be the highest number, 1 is going to be the lowest number. If it's not telling you like placements, like they're running a race, first place is obviously better than 6th place. But when it's talking about a higher value, we're going to be looking at 6 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. So I'm going to write L for low, H for high. So if Y has to be a higher number than T, what does that, let's say, let me see if you're actually understanding it. Let's say Y is 5. Where could T go then?
T could go either 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Yeah, so basically Y has to always be to the right of T. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
If I have Y on the second spot, where does that mean T has to go?
1.
Yeah. So basically, T is going to come technically before Y always, right? That must be is really important. That does not, it doesn't allow for flexibility between the two. It means that they have to go in that order. So one way to write this rule, because we're all about, making shortcuts and kind of making it easy for us to read so we don't have to reread the rules. One way to write this rule could be T-Y. And so when we look at the dash, kind of think of it like an accordion. It can go really far apart or it can be stuck together. We could have t and y here in 1 and 2, or I could string y all the way out here to 6 and have t at 1, y at 6. Because it's still following that pattern, right?
Yeah.
Any questions about that?
So on my sheet, will I write like on the side, like T slash T? I mean, Y, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't necessarily care how students write out rules, because when you're interpreting the rules, when you're looking at the game board and the questions, you're the one that's interpreting the rule, not me. So if it makes sense to do something else, totally fine. I'm kind of telling you how to do it because I'm going under the assumption we're at bare blocks, you don't know anything.
Right.
So I'm kind
Okay.
of telling you how to do it.
That's fine. That's great.
But the more that you do it, if you, oh, maybe smudge my calendar. The more that you do it, you may find that maybe writing it in a different way, it just makes more sense to you, which is totally fine. So, okay, so this rule isn't a great example of this, but when we look at making worlds, we're looking at eliminating the rules, right? So when I'm looking at rule 1, I'm looking to see how I can put that into my diagram so I don't have to think about it anymore. And one way of doing that is picking one of our variables and seeing where it could go on our graph. So we were kind of already talking about that a little bit. So we kind of talked about how like t could go in 1, y could go in 2, t could go in 1, y could go in 6. Basically, we have a lot of places that our t and y can go, right? T can pretty much go anywhere from 1 to 5, and y can go anywhere from 2 to 6, right? A lot of places it could go. My rule of thumb is don't create worlds, or don't really dive into that rule if it's creating more than 4 different possibilities. So this is creating a lot of different possibilities, because let's say t is at 1, y can go in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's just when t is in 1. So we're looking for something where maybe it's forcing t to go in 2, 3, or 4, or y can only go in 4, 5, or 6, or whatever. It's our first rule, which means that the other rules are going to either add on to that rule or create more of like a building block for us, where it's like creating like x and y have to go next to each other. That's a little more easier to place because we can't pull apart x and y. Does that make sense?
Oh, so that's what the square means? Like,
so yeah, usually when I do something, okay, there's no rule in this one that does this kind of scenario. But like if there was a rule that said x had to go immediately before y, I can put it in a box to kind of tell myself I can't pull it apart. They have to be stuck together. This is different than this because I can pull apart that t and y. That x and y, they're in a block. I can't pull them apart.
Okay.
Make sense? Okay. And again, really, I don't care how you or how you write the rule. So if you come across another rule in some game during your week of studying and you're like, I don't know how to write that one, just write something down to where it's kind of a shorthand of what you've already written. The way you write rules will gradually evolve into what makes sense to you.
Okay.
So let's check out rule number 2 and see what rule number 2 does for us. Rule number 2 says X must be assigned a higher numbered parking space than S. What do you think about that rule?
It's kind of similar like the first one, right? So
Yeah.
it'd be S dash X, right? S dash XU.
I'm going to write that down. So it's the exact same rule as our first rule. The only thing that they did was switch out the variables, which is something I want to harp on because that's kind of how all of these rules are within games. They're pretty much the same. They're just swapping out the variables, or maybe they're forming it in a different way. But
Okay.
this, the way that you've written it, I think you're getting stuck on the fact that 1 is not higher than 6. I think you're thinking that 1 is first place. It's got a higher place than 6, but we're looking at the value. So rather than S being S dash X, technically it would be, oh no, that is right. I was switching them around. Yeah, because X is a higher value than S, so X or S. X is always going to be to the right of S. Yeah, you're right. I'm tired.
Okay.
Okay. So if we're thinking about worlds and how to eliminate that rule, what do you, does it give us, how many possibilities does that give us? A lot or a few?
A lot.
A lot, because again, same thing with our T and Y. S can go from 1 to 5, X can go from 6 to 2, 2 to 6. So a lot of rules. I'm going to keep that to the side and deal with it as it comes. Now that I have 2 rules, sometimes it's also helpful to combine them. This doesn't really happen with this because we don't have any common variables. We can combine rules once we see those common variables. So if it had said Y had to be more than X, we could combine this rule with this rule because we're reading it like a book. We can't go backwards, so we can't flip it around or anything like that. We can only go forward. So we could combine it to go T is Y is X. Kind of like if you were to pick it up and just kind of overlap it, that's when you know you can combine rules. If we can just pick it up as it's written and overlap it into another rule.
Oh, okay. I see. That makes sense.
Yeah. I kind of think of it like when I was in elementary school and they had those projectors and you can move your things around and they can overlap one another. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, that makes it easier because if you have it like written down elsewhere and you can just like you said, like move it, like it'll fit right in place, you know?
Yeah. So that's another reason why I'm kind of writing my rules out like this is because it's informed with my diagram. So when I'm placing T and Y, it's not going to let me pick it up. It'll let me pick this one up. I can put it on the same format as my diagram. I don't have to like change them around or anything. Like if I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if I was going up and down, like we had kind of talked about earlier, I don't have to flip my S and X to fit this diagram. So when I write the rules, I'm writing it to conform to how my diagram is. So then I can mentally just pick it up and drop it in.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Any questions before we go into the third rule?
No.
Okay. Our third rule says R must be assigned to a higher number parking space than Y.
So it'd be Y dash R.
I should have saved my breath when we were talking about this because it's kind of exactly what we talked about. We can combine that with our first rule because we have a common variable and we don't have to change the way that it's written. We don't have to flip them or anything. We can simply pick up our Y and just overlap it with what, oh wow, I wrote it perfectly.
Oh.
We could overlap it with what we have already written. So technically, if T has to go before, or if Y has to go before T and R has to go before Y, no, that makes no sense. If T is a lower value than Y and Y is a lower value than R, we can assume that T is a lower value than R because it's part of this chain.
I'm confused on that one.
Okay. So it makes sense to you that we can pick it up and kind of connect them, right?
Yes, it did. I guess I just get confused, like where all of them go, like based on the rules, you know? So I have to go back and, think, okay, wait, this is the first one, you know, like, for example, like the number, like y going 6, right? And t going lesser. Like I just kind of get a little bit confused.
Yeah, I think it'll come with doing them a lot and getting a little more comfortable and exposure with them, because since they repeat themselves so much, part of games and what is like the worst part of mastering games is the exposure and doing them a lot.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the worst part of figuring out games.
Yes. Like
um,
retaining the information, you know, because I forget it.
yes, totally understand. Totally understand. But basically, what I'm saying is we can combine them together and figure out that t has to be a lower value than r, because if
Okay.
we know from the rule that r has to be higher than y and y has to be higher than t, we can kind of just follow that chain, I guess, to the right of what we've built. And we can say, well, that means that r has to be higher than t because it's part of this chain.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I see from rule number 3. Yeah, R has to be higher and then Y lower and then
Yeah.
E lower. Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
It's kind of like if it won't let me do it, but if we had taken 3, picked it up and moved it up here to 1 and had overlapped our young, it kind of forms one giant sentence. R must be higher than Y must be higher than T.
Okay, gotcha.
Any questions before we move on?
No.
Okay. So now that we've combined those two rules into this bigger rule, I don't have to look at 3 anymore. It's already written into my rules in a way that it's always going to be represented, because I'll always have this 3 chain.
Okay.
And then,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
all right, if you were running it on paper, like how would you do it? You just scratch it off like 3 and just, or how would you do it?
I will sometimes give myself more space. No, that didn't work. I'm gonna do this.
I mean, I guess as you practice along, you'd obviously would do it without having to scratch it off, right?
Yeah, sometimes you don't even have to. Sometimes I don't even write my rules down. But if I'm combining rules, sometimes I'll kind of do this and then go, this is my mega rule. So that way I can at least see where it's coming from if I need to, and they're all written out.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
So I'm going to move this over so I can do that. So T, Y, R. Any other questions before we move on?
No.
Okay. So the main reason why I recommend trying to combine rules when we can is because it makes it more restrictive in a way that we may not have seen before. So when we looked at T and Y, we said, T could go from 1 to 5, Y 2 to 6. If we looked at 3, Y could go from 2 to 5, R could go from 2 to 6 by themselves. But if we combine them together, we actually restrict where Y can go now, and T and R. Now, instead of T going from 1 to 5, we know that 2 variables have to go before T, right? Y and R. So technically now, T is only restricted from 1 to 4. Same with Y. Our Y becomes more restricted because it has to have 1 before and 1 after. So rather than saying Y can go from 2 to 6, Y actually is now only able to go from 2 to 5. So it has that extra space for T and R if it needs it. So it's made it more restrictive when we've combined our rules together.
Okay.
That being said, I would still like to go into our last rule before we kind of go into making worlds, because it's the last rule. Let's just flush it out. This is the last rule, right? Yeah, last rule. So our last rule says R must be assigned to parking space 1, 2, 3, or 4. How, reading that rule, what are your initial thoughts, or how would you initially write this down if you had to rewrite it?
Maybe R dash 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sure. I only have 4 spots that R can go in, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we wanted to eliminate the rule and bake it into my diagram, this is a great rule to start with because we only have 4 places that R can go. It's a little bit easier than dealing with our T, Y, and R for right now. So we can say R can go in 1, 2, 3, or 4. Since we have 4 different options, we're going to create 4 worlds, 4 scenarios.
Oh, okay.
I get very uneven with my stuff, so I apologize if it's kind of hard to read. I usually do line paper when I do this in like real life.
Oh.
It's a little bit easier. Okay, so in one of my worlds, I'm going to say R is in 1. In my other world, R is in 2, R is in 3, R is in 4. That is encompassing the only places where R can go, and it's splitting it into 4 worlds. So then when I look at the world itself, let's say I'm looking at world 1, I don't have to remember that R could go in 1, 2, 3, or 4. I don't have to mentally shift R around. I've created the 4 worlds so I know where R is at that point, but it's still including all the places that it can go. So does that make sense before I move on?
Yeah, yes, it does, yes.
Okay. So then when I go into my other rules, then I have to treat all 4 of these as different worlds because they're different now. R is in a first place, my 4th world, R is in a 4th place. So that's going to depend or change where some of my variables can go, and that's why and how these worlds become unique and why we get so many different worlds, 5 to 8 on average, is because we have to account for all the possibilities, right? So now that we've placed R in all of our worlds, expanded on where R can go, I don't have to think about that rule anymore. I usually erase it on my end, but when you're doing the actual test, I wouldn't recommend erasing it. It takes time. I would probably just cross it out.
Okay.
Basically, I don't have to think about that rule anymore. It's
Okay.
baked into my diagram.
Gotcha.
Now, oh, the other thing you can do, cross out R. I figured out where R can go. I don't have to worry about R up there anymore.
Okay.
Now, a really good rule to start with after you've kind of placed a couple variables down is a rule that mentions that variable. So if I've placed R down, do I have a rule that also mentions R?
Yes.
Yeah, our mega rule, basically. It's easy to build upon that because I already know where one of those variables has to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I know that my rule is saying it has to be T, Y, R, in my first world, because we're going to look at them individually, in my first world, can I make it so T and Y are before R?
No.
No, because R is in my first spot, right?
There wouldn't be enough space, right?
Say it again.
There wouldn't be enough space for T and Y.
Yeah, because we don't have anything lower than 1. So
Okay.
rather than making R shift down or anything, because we've already done that in our second and third world, or second, third, 4th world, I can just cross out this world.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to force it to fit what I have, because if it's not fitting, it's because it's not supposed to happen. R is not supposed to be first in this game.
Okay.
We're going to move on to world number 2. Same question. Can I make my mega rule fit?
No.
No. So same thing. I'm going to scribble it out.
Okay.
because I'm not going to try to force it to fit. And you're probably already seeing, well, it has to have 2 spaces, means it's going to have to, lowest it can go is 3. Rather than erasing the second R and shifting it over to 3, I don't have to do that because I've already created a world where R is in 3. So it kind of would be more work to move my R over. I'm just going to cross it out. And my third world, can I make my mega rule fit?
Yes.
What would happen to my T and Y?
T would go in 1 and Y would go in 2.
Yeah, those are the only places it can go in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Last world, 4. Can I make my mega rule fit?
Yes. T would go in 2 and Y would go in 3.
Could be a possibility. But also remember our dashes can be pulled apart, right?
Oh, that's right.
Even
So
though we can pull apart T and Y, T or Y can also be pulled apart from R. So not even thinking about that R has to be in 3 or 4. Technically, just based on the rule, I could have something like this. It's following my mega rule. T is before Y, before R, but I don't have any specificities of how many spaces have to be between them, right? So they can be pulled apart in any which way.
Oh, I see.
So one way to attack this is to pick one of my variables that I have to place and figure out where can it go, because it can only go in so many places. So if we're looking at my mega rule, I already figured out where R can go. Let's figure out where T can go. So based on this diagram, when R is in 4, where could my T go?
1.
Could go in 1. Where else could it go?
T could go in 2.
Yeah. Could T go in 3?
Yeah. Well, I guess because you said the dashes means that it can go anywhere, right?
Not necessarily it can go anywhere. It's going to have to be in this order, but they can be separated by so many spaces. So it'll always have to be T first, Y second, R third. But I could have like 2 spaces between T and Y and 1 space between R and Y.
So then T cannot go in 3.
Yeah, because I don't have a space for Y, right? So technically, given my rule, my mega rule, I only have 2 places that T can go in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it can only go in 1 or 2.
Yeah. So now that we figured out where T can go, let's figure out where Y can go. In that 4th world, where could my Y go?
It could go in 2.
Where else?
It could go in 3.
Yeah. So every time we can think of a new place a variable is going to go, we're going to split off that world and make that copy. So then we don't have to mentally move our variables around. We've already got it written down where our variables can go. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What about my 5th world? We got to place Y in there. Where can Y go?
3.
Yeah, has to go in there, right? I don't have any other space to put Y that's between R and T. Now I've got T, Y, and R placed, and all of my worlds, I figured out where they can go in, which means I don't have to think about this rule anymore, or our mega rule, because I've already got it baked into my diagram where T, Y, and R can go. So no matter what our question asks me, no matter what diagram I'm using, it's always going to follow those rules.
Okay.
I've eliminated the rule basically. And once we eliminate the second rule, we'll go into the questions and you'll see why we spend so much time doing this, because the questions become a lot easier. Okay. Any questions before we move on to our last rule?
No.
Okay. Our last rule says S has to go before X, right?
Mm-hmm.
So new rule means that we have to go all the way back up to the top to our most valid world, which would be 3. So S has to go before X. I have 3 spaces. Easiest just to pick a variable and figure out which spot it could go in. So I don't care which variable you want to pick on, but tell me where that variable, whatever variable you choose, could go given my 3 spaces.
S can go in 4, and X can go in 6.
Yes. Where else could S go?
5,
Yes.
and X would go in 6.
Ah, I just like Jackie Chan'd it and like caught it and then it flew away. This thing has been like flying in my face while I sleep. I think it's like in love with me because it does not leave me alone. I'm going to start writing these off to the side because I don't have a whole lot of space. So we have T, Y, R. So you said S could go in 4 and S could go in 5, right?
Yes.
Okay. When S is in 5, what has to happen to X? If it's following my pattern.
Yeah. X has to go in 6.
Yeah. Okay, now bear with me on this one. When S is in 4, where could X go?
When S is in 4, X can go in either 5 or 6.
Yeah, no matter where I put X at this point, it's not going to break that rule. S is always going to be before X, right? So what I can do is breaking it into another world. I can flip it with my other variable that I haven't touched. What is my last and final variable that I haven't touched yet?
V?
Yeah. This is what we call a floater. V is not mentioned in any of our rules, meaning that V can go anywhere at once and it's not going to violate the game. It's kind of like a free space. Oh my God. So what we can do, because X can go in 5 and 6 and V will go in 5 or 6, whichever I don't put X in, I can actually write it like this. When I've picked X to go in 5, it means that I have to pick V to go in 6.
Okay.
And that is our first world. We've pretty much placed all of our variables in that world. I put a check mark next to them, so I know I'm done, but you don't have to. But we can finish off 7 because we only have 1 spot and we only have 1 more variable left. What variable is that?
V.
Yeah. Great. Cool. Now we're going to move on to 4. We're going to do this for all of those 3 last worlds. Let's figure out where S can go, place X, place V. Good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in our 4th world, where could S go? Don't worry about X right now. Just where could S go?
S can go on 3, and that's it.
Could I have 1 more place that I can put it. Let's see if you can figure it out.
5?
Yeah.
Yeah, 5.
Yeah. So again, because I have 2 places that S can go, and I'm going to create that duplicate. And in one of them, I'm going to say S is on 3. And one of them, I'm going to say S is on 5. Now let's start with number 8, because we are kind of forced to put our variables in places. Finish the rest of that world for me, number 8.
So I will use 8 with world 4, right? Oh,
Not exactly. So they're separate worlds now because we've placed S in 2 different places. Does that make sense?
okay, I see.
Yeah, in this world we said S is going to be in 3, and in this one we said S is going to be in 5. So they're coming from the same world because our T and our R are in the same place. But the moment we put S or any other variable in 2 different places, they're different.
Okay. Oh, okay. So for number 8, are we moving into X now?
Yeah, so in number 8, where could X go?
X could go 6.
Has to go in 6, right?
Yes.
And
V could go on the last one.
yeah. Okay, let's go into 4. Where could X go in 4?
X can go 6.
Could go 6. Where else could it go? Yeah, it can go in 5 or 6. It flip flops, kind of like what we did up in our 3rd world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what's our last variable that we haven't touched in our 4th world? What are we missing? Yeah, so X is flipping with V. And again, the only reason that we can do that is because no matter where we put X, whether it be in 5 or 6, it's always going to follow this pattern. S is before X.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's move on to our 5th world. Let's try to eliminate the 2nd rule still. So let's pick on S. Where could S go in our 5th world?
1.
Could go in 1. Where else could it go?
5.
Yeah. So 2 different options means 2 different worlds.
Oh, okay. So I guess that's where I was a little confused. Whenever we introduce like another slot, I guess, to put another variable, then we create another world.
Yeah, so the moment you go, S could be in 1 or 2, or V could go in 3 or 4, we're going to break it up. So then we don't have to mentally remember, okay, V can shift between 3 and 4. We're just going to write it down in 2 worlds, V's in 3, V's in 4.
Okay, gotcha. I was getting a little confused because we didn't do that with the previous one, I think. So that's why I was like, oh, okay. No, I get it now. Okay.
The 4th one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we could split it out into X is going to go in 5, V in 6, and then do another one where V is in 5, X is in 6. We totally could do that. The reason why I didn't do that is because it's not going to impact where any of our other variables are going to go. Whereas when we look at S in 1 or 5, it impacts where X can go. So like in number 9, X only has that one spot it can go in, 6, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But in 5, when S is in 1, X can go in 5 or 6. So depending on where S goes, impacts where X can go. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry.
You're fine. So that's why we're splitting them, is because when we split them, different things happen. We're not fully done with the world, or we're not fully done with the rule when we split them. We still have more to figure out. We still have more to figure out where X can go and where V can go. Specifically our X, because that's part of our rule.
Okay.
So let's continue with 5, because I put X in 6, but tell me where X can go in 5. My 5th world.
X can go in 6.
Could go in 6. Where else could it go?
And it can go in 5.
Yeah. This is the part that a lot of students kind of struggle with to begin with, is to think about where else your variable can go, because you're kind of inclined to automatically go, well, it can go in 3, so then it has to go in 3. But we're trying to break that habit, so it could go into 3, but it could also have other options. And when we have other options, it impacts what other worlds we build.
So in this case for 5, we don't have to create a new world because it's not necessary, right?
Yeah, we could create the new world if we wanted to, but basically if I'm creating the new world, I'm going to kind of mini diagram it. If I created 2 worlds where I flipped X and V, nothing changes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like my 1 through 4 stays the same. The only thing that's changing is my 5 and 6.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But when I'm splitting my S, rather than, I'm going to use this world for an example, number 6. If I said S can go in 5 or S can go in 2, that's going to impact where my X goes. Because if I said S was in 2, X can go in 5 or 6. But if I said S was in 5, X has to go in 6. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
So when nothing really changes with the rest of the rules, we can do a shortcut like this to notate that we can just flip them. We don't really have to create that second world.
Okay, and then the check marks that you put, what does that mean again? Like it just means that
My world is done. I don't have to look at it, or
okay.
I don't have to do anything else to that world. There's no other rule that I have to go through because this is my last rule. I've placed all of my variables. I don't have any miscellaneous variables that I need to attend to. There's nothing else that I need to do with that world. You don't have to put the check marks. I do because sometimes I forget.
And honestly, it makes it easier to distinguish, I would say.
Yeah, because then once, like, especially when I tutor specifically, if we go on a tangent on something else and we come back and I'm like, what were we doing again? Where were we at? It's kind of easy to see that. But when you're like doing the game itself, you're not going on tangents, so it's a little easier to keep track of what you've done. So when I did games, I never check marked anything. I only started it when I started tutoring. Okay. So for number 9, let's finish off number 9. What else do we have to place?
V.
Yep. Okay. Last world, and then we'll go into some questions to kind of show you how to use them. So last world means that we're going to try to eliminate this last rule. If S has to go before X, let's figure out where S can go. Where can S go in my 6th world?
S can go in 2, or it can go in 5.
Yeah, so I'm going to create that duplicate. T, Y, R. I'm going to have one where S is in 2 and one where S is in 5. Ready?
Mhm.
Okay. When S is in 5 in my 10th world, where can X go?
X can only go in 6.
Yeah. And finish off the world for me. What else do I have to place?
And you'd put V.
Yep. Oh, come on, man. When S is in my 2nd spot in my 6th world, where could X go?
X can go in either 5 or 6.
And who's it flipping with? What
Uh,
other variable do I have to place?
V?
Yep, we haven't placed V in there. So no matter where X goes, V is going to fill in the empty spot, basically. So when I pick X in 5, V is going to go in 6. When X is in 6, V is going to go in 5.
Okay.
And those are my worlds.
Yeah, that makes it much easier. I think once I like review it again, like the video and stuff, I'll be able to understand a little bit better, in regards to the like making the new world, But
Yeah.
I understand it much better.
Yeah, and this way when it goes into the questions, and we can do some of the questions. I think I just got, let me get the right answers off there. When it goes into, oh, what are we on, 64?
Yes.
Okay. When it goes into the questions and it's asking us what could be true if S is in 4, or what has to be true if V is in 4, they're easy to locate because then we can go, that world has V in 4. That world has V in 4. I have T in 1, T in 1, X and Y, whatever. It becomes a lot easier. So, do you have any questions on the setup?
No.
It is going to take some time to get used to, so be a little patient with it. But the best part is when we go into the questions, because you're going to go, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we're going to go. Let's do this one first. This one will be an easy one to kind of wean yourself into. So our question says, if R is assigned to the 3rd parking space, then which one of the following must be true? Okay. So first off, this question is what I call an if question. It's restricting us to only when R is in our 3rd spot. And if you look at our worlds, we have worlds where R is not in our 3rd spot. But we do have some where R is in our 3rd spot. So when your question restricts you like this, your first objective is to figure out which worlds you're in. So for example, in this one, if R is assigned to the 3rd parking spot, I have that happening my 3rd world. I have R in my 3rd spot. And my 7th world, R is in my 3rd spot. Mm-hmm. The other worlds don't have R in 3, right?
Right.
So for this question only, I can only look at 3 and 7. Okay. It doesn't mean that we can't use these anymore. It just means we can't use them for this question specifically.
Okay, gotcha.
So now we're looking for something that must be true. And when we're looking for something that must be true, it is 100% guaranteed always going to happen. So what that means is, oh, do you have a Frenchie?
Oh, no.
Oh, he looks like a Frenchie.
He's a mix. Supposedly Chihuahua and German Shepherd. I have no idea how that happened, but
I love when students bring their pets on. Makes me so happy. But when we're looking at a must be true, it has to be true in both of the worlds, because it has to be 100% guaranteed that when R is in Y, it is always true that A happens, B happens, whatever. So when you go through the answer choices, ask yourself, does this have to be true in both of my worlds? So for A, does it have to be true that we have S in our 4th spot?
For 3, yes. And not for 7.
Yeah. So it does not have to be true that S is in a fourth spot when R is in the third spot. It has to happen in both of them in order for it to be the correct answer.
Okay.
So because it's not happening in both of them, we can eliminate A. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for the next one, T is assigned parking space 2. So I'd look at where T is assigned on 2, which would be 5.
No.
Or
I think you're getting them flipped. So the question is when we're restricted to the
oh, I'm sorry, 3. I'm sorry, R, right? R for 3. So it'll stay that way. Okay,
yeah. So every time, so when we've narrowed it down to our 2 worlds, like we have here, we will always be in those 2 worlds for our answer choices.
Okay.
So for B, does it have to be true in 3 and 7 that T is in the second parking space?
No.
Yeah, actually, this one is what we would call a must be false because it doesn't happen at all. Y has to be in our second one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can cross out B because it does not have to be true that T is in my second spot. What about C? V is assigned to the 5th spot. Does that have to be true?
It could be true, but it doesn't have to be true.
Yes. Focus on how you said that because a lot of students will be like, well, that could happen, but it doesn't happen in this world. And that's the whole reason why it's wrong, is because it could happen, but it doesn't have to happen. If this was a could be true, if it said instead of must be true, it said could be true, then this could be a correct answer because it could be true that V is in our 5th spot. But we're looking for something that 100% has to happen. So because it's not happening in that 7th world, we can cross it off.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You good? Okay. Let's go into D. Does it have to be true that X is in my 6th spot?
For 3, maybe. And for 6, yes.
So what can we do with this answer choice? Is it crossed off or are we keeping it?
Cross it off because we're not certain.
Yeah. Because it could be true in our 6th world doesn't mean that has to be true. So we can't pick it because it's not 100% guaranteed that X is 6. E better be our answer. Otherwise, I did something wrong. Does it have to be true that Y is in our 2nd spot?
Yes.
Yeah, we actually kind of talked about that earlier. It has to be true in both of those worlds that Y is in the 2nd spot because it's happening in both of those worlds. So that's why E is our correct answer. The other thing that you could do if you want practice with these must be true questions is these must be true questions can actually be predictable once you get more comfortable with it. Because if it has to happen in both of the worlds, that means I can go through the worlds and see what's consistent in them. What is solid in both of them. So technically, there is another answer choice that could have been our correct answer, and that would be our T. In both of those worlds, T has to be in our 1st spot. So if this instead said T is in our 1st spot, we could also pick that answer. It's only going to have 1. So if you do a must be true and you have 2 that must be true, you did something wrong and you need to relook at the rules or what you did with your diagrams. That's a key indicator that you messed up somewhere, which is good to at least acknowledge. So your must be true should always have, well, all of your questions should always have 1 answer.
Okay.
How do you feel about that question?
It was very easy once, we have like the diagram and everything to help. It made it much easier to answer.
Yeah, and Did you notice how little time we spent on the wrong answer choices? If we had just gone straight into the questions and gone into our answer choices, we'd have to diagram out each one. And that's time consuming. So that's why we do worlds. It's because it's less in the long run. It's less time consuming. We do spend more time building our worlds, but we know for 100% that this is our answer choice, E. Do you have any questions on that?
How long does it, like once you master, how long does it typically last to create like the diagrams and the worlds and all that?
I think I could create this diagram in maybe 3-4 minutes.
And then the remainder of the time to answer questions. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So going through the answer or the questions, how many do we have? 6? Say maybe less than a minute per question. Because if you kind of saw, we can kind of go through and go, is S in 4? Nope, not happening here. Wrong. T in 2. Nope, wrong. It becomes a lot easier once you kind of get used to them. And they repeat themselves all the time. So it's not just this game that has this kind of question. You're going to see that exposure a lot in the other ones. So that's where your speed comes from, is the exposure to the games. Because you're going to go, oh, that reminds me of this question, or oh, that reminds me of that one.
Yeah.
So it takes some time to get used to the technique of world building, but it pays off in the long run.
And I honestly like it. Like it's making me understand it much, much better.
Yeah. And you don't really, I mean, you kind of have to worry about them, but like, if you noticed, we didn't have to do contrapositives or anything like that. And I hate contrapositives. They're so confusing. And if you diagram it wrong, you get it wrong. So rather than thinking about that stuff, I'm just thinking about where could that variable go then? And I'm going to create the scenarios where that variable can go, and it kind of domino effects. So that would be my number one thing for you to remember for this week is if you blank, if you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm completely lost, pick a variable within one of your rules and see where it can go on your diagram. And so, for example, if we were doing our, what just happened? Okay, that was weird.
Like for our question, the first one, we went with the one that was most repetitive, right? That's what we did? We started off with R, right?
We started off with R because it says if R is assigned to the third parking spot. So it restricted us to only when R was in our third spot. That's why we went into those two worlds. Make sense? If it has a rule where, I don't know if any of them have them. Maybe in another game. If it has a rule kind of like this, where it doesn't give an if, or it's not restricting, if it's just kind of what some companies call global, that's when we're going to use all of the worlds. So we're going to have to look at all of our worlds within that question. When it's just giving me an if, we're restricted to where that if is happening.
Okay, let me see.
But I want to leave you with this. If we were working on this game, or if you're working on this game by yourself, and you're like, I don't know where to start building my worlds, start with one rule, pick a letter, see where it can go. And if it comes to the point where T could go in all of them, make 6 worlds and place T in all of them. Then figure out, okay, T or Y has to go after T. Where can that happen? Make those worlds. That's kind of a good place to start because, like I said, it's going to domino effect into your other rules. It's going to force some variables to go in other spots. So.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. Do you have any questions before we leave for the day?
No, I think I just need to like practice more.
Yes.
And once I obviously practice and things will hopefully come to order, and obviously I'll have more questions then.
Yes. Oh yes. Yeah. Um Wednesday evening. Oh, not this week. Next week, Wednesday evening at your Central Time, right?
Yeah.
Yes. At 5 o'clock Central Time, I do a free class where we do this. We build worlds on different games. So if you need kind of more guidance on what to do, and I would say I would probably recommend it at least for the first 2 weeks of you kind of getting into this, come to that Wednesday class because that'll kind of be, you'll hear me repeat the things over and over again. Sometimes that's what you need.
Okay.
And those do get recorded too. So if you aren't able to attend, you can at least get the recording.
Okay.
Um, okay. Well, I'm going to share with you a Google folder and it's going to have your assignment in it. Try your very best. Think about where your variables can go. Try your very best on them. If you want to go into the questions, totally feel free to go into the questions, but I want you to be more focused on building the worlds because that's kind of where I want you to strengthen in. And then message me if you have any questions. I'm going to stop.